that same, I guess, level of attention and transparency. Not always, anyways. I'm sure others are doing it. So that I like that a lot. How and also positioning everybody to be aware of, or at least asking the question, are you okay with talking to the community? And then setting those expectations too. It's like, we're not looking for you to do this, but it's more along these lines. And again, it just goes back into, I think, that whole process you outlined before, and how it can really impact not just the healthy team, but also being confident and really standing out among your community and among the greater community too, and how a studio can be represented outside of just simply making a game, but they're just bringing that whole extra level of things to it, and that's important for fans and people who are following games too, for sure.
I feel like for like larger, especially AAA studios and where there's hundreds or thousands of people involved, it would be very difficult to make that happen.
Yes.
And I think also, like, part of this being sort of an almost anonymized entity is one of the reasons why people get very skewed expectations of like what they can demand from a studio, and then when like a game gets backlash, it's like really hard as an employee to like see all this shit being thrown at you, even though it's not directed at you personally because you poured so much work into it. It's like, how do you deal with that? That's, yeah, I don't know. I don't have an answer for that one.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Because again, those dynamics change and stuff, and I'm sure there's a whole topic that could discuss like dealing with that and everything else. But it's always a challenge though. When you get the haters, I mean, there's ways to make some of into some of them as fans, if you have the empathy and understanding of where they may be coming from, and you also just have the ability to ignore them, and sometimes that's a strategy too, depending on how things fly. But yeah, you're absolutely right, that can be a challenge too. But you know, I still think to at least from a small scale and how we're and what we're discussing about today, taking those approaches are good, because if you think about it, what's more of the norm? You know, AAA or even bigger studios that by legitimate reason are falling into maybe what you may call a standardized version of these types of communications, whereas as a studio, as yourself, and the size that you are, having the ability to do this, it just also allows you to stand out more. And again, like I said before, it provides that extra level of transparency, which is, I think, just really refreshing from a player and fan perspective.
Oh, yeah, for sure. That's one of the like perks of indie studios, that they can afford to be much more personal and much more direct with fans and people that are in the game sphere in general.
Definitely. All right. So, one, and I don't, I'm just curious in how you would solve a situation like this, because I know this is something that probably does happen with people, even in small teams. Because like sometimes there just may be a team member that, you know, just doesn't jive with everyone else, or there's other issues. What would you say are the best ways to deal with these situations?
Sorry, what situations?
Where, let's say you have a team member that just doesn't work well with everyone else, or they just ended up not being a good fit, things along those lines.
That's really tough. First part, I suppose, would be figuring out or trying to figure out why they're not fitting in. So I suppose it comes back to like asking questions, but even that can be troublesome if they themselves feel like they're not part of the team. So I'm not sure. That's really tough. It's just like if you can't establish that things are welcoming and things are like working well, and you can iron out smaller differences over time. If you have that much of a schism going on, I don't know how you could rectify that or deal with that aside from like, I don't know, parting ways at some point.
Yeah. So it almost sounds like too then, and I know I was asking strictly from your experience and or how you would deal in that situation. Um, I think a good point in what you're saying too is simply if you're coming across some of those situations too, and it's kind of like surfacing, it could put something into question about potentially the other practices or processes that you either do or don't follow. And so asking questions, if it comes to that point, asking questions and trying to get to the bottom of it and making those determinations, obviously I would say, yeah, definitely the right direction to go at that moment in time. But then it's probably also important too, if anybody out there comes across or is facing those, it might be one of those things where you're just reevaluating yourself as a company. Like, are you hitting on those points that we discussed earlier, in terms of really doing everything you can to build that healthy team environment? Are you having those check-ins? Are you really showing that you're listening? And if you're not necessarily like kind of hitting all those marks, that could be an explanation in terms of why these situations may arise. So I can understand with some of your hesitancy with coming forward with an answer, because in your mind, from what we discussed, it's like, well, I already have these things in place, so until they happen, I really can't say necessarily anything that much more detailed about it. That's what my take would be.
It's did have I did have in the past like problems with team members where it just didn't work out. But those were not situations where I was like in any ability to do something about it. We were just stuck working together. Mm-hmm. And so there, in that kind of situation, it's very different, because then you're just gonna try and make do with what you have. Versus if you're actually like in a sort of management position, you do have the ability to do something about it and like try to restructure things. So it's a very delicate balance. And I think at that point, what's important to remember is that it doesn't necessarily always have to work out. Like at some point, there just is a divide there that isn't worth trying to reconcile. And at that point, it's just better to try and go your separate ways. Like, it's just, I don't know. Things just don't work out.
Yeah, no, and again, it's those situations are always tough. But I think to your point, it's good to also recognize, like, hey, yes, it might be a really tough situation. Yes, if it doesn't work out, what is this going to do for me or for the team moving forward? Is it going to cause some headaches and such? Of course, but at the same time, what is the cost of that versus the cost of if let's say it forms some type of toxic environment or any number of different things that can come out of it? What could be like kind of do like a risk assessment, right? If it gets really to that point where you just have to go separate ways. Because like you said, in some situations like you had before where it wasn't in the for whatever reason you weren't able to, like, you just kind of had to work with it. And I think then it goes to like, okay, asking the questions and things like that so you can still hit the marks that you need to. But in different cases, if you have to part or whatever, having a good, we're just taking that moment to do that quick risk assessment, because you don't want necessarily one person to affect the potential of your entire team or whatever to either. So yeah, but you're right, it's tough. It's always tough. All right. Cool. Well, I know I put you on the spot with that one, but I really appreciate like the thought and process you went to answer that, and it is still like a good response to a difficult thing, because I'm sure a lot of people would have those challenges, and hey, if we can provide some insight to help people, if they ever come in these situations, or anything that we're talking about today, I think that in itself is extremely valuable and helpful for everybody here. So, knowing that and talking about helpful stuff, as we close, are there any, like, out of everything we talked about today, are there any, like, 3 tips or suggestions that you would highly recommend based on our discussion today?
Yeah, sure. I would say, first of all, if you are in like a leading position, it's the onus is on you, so to speak. Like it's your job to make sure that people see you, that not only that you are open, but also people see you as actually open, and that they can talk to you and like speak freely and voice their concerns and have input on the project. But also, so I guess that will be like point 1.
Yep.
But also just that you make sure as much as you can ahead of time that you do jive with people, and that you get along and like work with together, not just as like a team that can do stuff, but also as people that can chat with each other and like share their own a piece of their own world, so to speak. And I suppose the last point would be to try and make sure that you are aware of yourself as well. And that's one of the toughest parts, like noticing when you yourself are like letting up on doing something, like, oh shit, I noticed I didn't like check up on this enough, or like I promised to do this and I didn't do it. And like noticing that and owning up to it, and like making sure everyone knows that you're trying to do a better job, even if you fucked up at one point. Like that's also very important.
Yeah, I think like that's probably definitely a really good one too. Just basically showing humility and being humble in that respect, because it says a lot. And not only that, I think you'll get a lot more out of your team too, where it's like, oh look, I messed up, and I know I did, because I think it can reduce any type of in most cases reduce a lot of tension that could have come out of those situations, if there was any, right? Like when you call out to that stuff, they're like, okay, you know what? I make mistakes too, right? It's a lot more relatable and everything else. But of course, it's also important that if you call yourself on those things, to do something about it too, not just keep calling yourself out, because that just doesn't look good. All great points. I really appreciate you sharing those, and super helpful. All right. So as we close here, Nicolas, again, can't thank you enough for being here. But before you leave, please share us. How can people find out more about Candria? Like, do you have a website, and more about your studio, ShinMera? And is there a good way to reach out to you if people have questions, or just give us all the details, and so people can learn more or get in contact with you?
Right, time to hit those subscribe buttons, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Our game is Candria.com, so that's KANDRIA.com. That's our game. You can read the info there. You can subscribe to our mailing list, which will give you access to our new demo. Awesome. It has a trailer and Steam link and all of that fun stuff on there. About me personally, I'm ShinMera on pretty much everything. So if you see that username somewhere, that will be me. I have a website, shinmera.com. That's SHINMERA. You'll find links to most things there, as well as like things about me and what I do. There'll be an email contact there as well, but that's shinmera@tymoon.eu. And social media, like primarily I'm on Twitter, so twitter.com/ShinMera will be my primary contact. Yeah, but if you have questions, I'm always available and happy to answer anything.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you very much for being on the show. And people, if you want to check out Candria, and go to the site, as he mentioned, it will be in the show notes, and click subscribe, and you'll get that link to the demo as well. So, Nicolas, thank you so much for being on the show and really sharing how to build healthy teams. I'm sure this is something that a lot of people are going to find very useful. So, again, appreciate your time here. Yeah, thanks a lot for having me. This was a lot of fun. I hope I had some useful input. Hey everyone, thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. If you enjoy and value the show's content, you can support